What is the purpose of offering up our intentions and our sufferings for another person, right? What good does that do when we fast and we do abstinence or we pray for someone else? Like, what effect is going on here? And is Christ really calling us to do that? Before I get into that answer, I think a really good way to kind of start this conversation is by reading a passage of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, you've probably heard this passage many times before, but after reading it, I'm going to explain to you guys some other meaning that Christ is telling us through the parable of the Good Samaritan, specifically for the good of another person's soul. So comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 29 to 36. But because the man wished to justify himself, he asked, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him and beat him, and then went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be traveling along that same road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. A Levite likewise came to that spot and saw him, but he too passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was traveling along that road came up to him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went up to him and bandaged his wounds after pouring oil and wine on them. Then he brought him to his own animal to an inn and looked after him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Look after him, and when I return I will repay you for anything more you might spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He answered, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now, when we read this passage at face value, it's a lesson in watching after your neighbor, right? Maybe in like a physical way, right? If we see somebody who's maybe hungry, maybe we see someone who's been hurt or abused, the righteous thing to do, regardless of how we feel about the person. And this was a lesson for the Jews, because the Jews did not like the Samaritans. So regardless of how you feel about the person, that person has been made in the image and likeness of God, and you have to help them, right? That's what we're called to do. And yes, this is a lesson and a story about watching after your neighbor, but it's also a lesson in how we should be praying and offering up our sacrifices for one another. And the reason why we do, you might have heard in the Catholic Church, or maybe Catholics, saying like, offer it up, right? Maybe you're going through something difficult, and you want to complain about it, and you might have had a priest or a teacher or a parent tell you, just offer it up, right? And the reason why we offer it up is because for every sin that we commit, there is a punishment associated with that sin, right? An easy example of this is, let's say, for example, I throw a ball and it hits a window, right? Now, I might go to that neighbor, I might go to that person and say sorry, and they could say, "Okay, I forgive you, but you still have to fix this window," right? And when we sin, we cause damage to the relationship we have with God, and everybody is guilty of this. Myself included. We have all committed sins that have cataclysmic events that we may not foresee with our eyes, but we can see them, and we actually will see them in the future, right? At the last judgment, we're gonna see every single sin that's been committed. We're also gonna see the grace of God and the mercy of God as well, right? And one thing to know too is that at this end, the people who are part of the elect, they're gonna see this, but then they're also gonna rejoice in God's mercy and love. And then the people that are damned, they're gonna see that and be and have incredible shame, right? Because they're going to see what they missed out on, how they didn't ask for God's mercy. But when we are praying and when we're offering sacrifice for someone else, what we are doing is we are not only praying for the grace for them to amend their life and to change, but in some cases, right? Some cases, like for example, during the month of October, when we celebrate All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day, we have a thing in the church where you can pray at a cemetery and God will give them a partial or plenary indulgence for the sins they committed, and we can do it on their behalf, right? Because once we're in purgatory, we are part of the church suffering, right? The church here on earth is called the church militant. The church in purgatory is the church suffering. The church in heaven is the church triumphant, right? So we are part of the church militant right now. So one of the things that we can do is we can offer our good works, offer our sufferings for the souls in purgatory. And what we are doing in this, what Jesus is telling us in this situation is sometimes, when we are doing the hard things, when we are doing things that are difficult, and we offer them up, we can offer them up for somebody who's been literally poisoning themselves with sin, because that's what sin is. Sin is poison. Sin is a slow death that needs to be remedied. And one of the ways that Jesus did this, in fact, the way that Jesus did this was through his passion and his death, right? And because everything that Christ did in his life, at least the life here on earth, was infinitely meritorious, that means anything that we do in union with him can be offered for someone else. And this is something that might be hard to wrap your head around, but even something as simple as cooking a meal for your family, right, can have merit, right? It can have merit and you can, as long as you're offering it to God, right? This is why a lot of us Catholics, especially if you're someone who has the brown scapular, you say a morning offering, right? And when you say a morning offering, you're offering your joys, works, and sufferings of this day in the union of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And I know this might sound really simple and plain and kind of unbelievable, but this is what the church has been teaching for thousands of years. And one of the things that we can do for our fellow Samaritans, and in this case, this could be somebody who maybe is a family member, maybe someone you don't like, is treat them with compassion, be moved with compassion, right? And this is something that we might have to pray about, and something I pray about certainly is sometimes I'll look at someone's life, someone who's living in sin, and someone who's doing things that are against God's will, and sometimes I'll jump to judgment mode. I'll jump to thinking I'm better than them, or thinking that somehow this person doesn't need saving. If I keep praying for them, it's not going to have any effect. And that's a really bad thought to have. And that thought is coming directly from the evil one, right? If you ever have those thoughts. But what Christ tells us to do is that regardless of the situation, regardless of how broken someone may be, we need to still pray for them. We need to still offer sufferings for them. We need to offer we need to offer everything for that person, because God can use that. He can use that for the salvation of souls. This is what Our Lady's been telling us. This is what Christ tells us. This is what the apostles tell us. This is what the church has been teaching, is that suffering has purpose and has meaning, and it can benefit someone else, right? And if this is a hard teaching to wrap your head around, I want you to think of it this way. We can't see with our eyes directly what sin causes to a person, right? We also can't see when we can't see certain things such as growth and conversion. I know for me personally, I felt that all of a sudden I got this grace to change what I was doing with my life. And I can't explain how it happened. I can't give you the measurements, but I know it happened suddenly. And I know that there's a person out there that I'm going to need to thank one day. And I think about this person, and I think about the many people who've probably prayed for me. I think about all the nuns who live in convents who are spending their days just praying for broken people like me. And I think of all the priests who have done that. I think of the bishops. I think of my family members. I think of people who I've just passed by, who might have just thought about praying for me, right? Who just might have thought this person might need prayers. And God heard their prayer and then caused me to revert back to my faith again. So I can't tell you how many times, I've prayed for someone, or I knew someone who's getting a lot of prayers, and then they just completely turned their life around. This is similar with the Good Samaritan. When somebody has no one to pray for them, when someone has, especially our priests and bishops, right? How often do we pray for them, right? 90% of the time, all the stuff I see on the internet is complaining about bishops. Sorry, it's kind of kind of frustrating. Like, we should be praying for our bishops and not complaining constantly. Now, don't get me wrong. If there's something they're doing bad, yeah, we got to call it out like it is. But at the same time, how many of us are actually praying for the intentions of the Pope? How many of us are actually praying for the bishops and priests that are serving us, right? Because they need prayers too, just like you and me. We all need prayers. And God hears our prayers. He hears us. And one of the best things we can do is offer up all of our intentions for those people, for people who we know are broken and suffering, even people we think that don't even need it. Because, it just takes one little slippery slope for you to go back, right? To go back down. And I can't stress that enough, because I know someone prayed for me, and I encourage you guys to pray for me, and I'll pray for you as well. Because the more people we have praying for each other, the better the world's going to be because of it. So, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. God bless.